The heavens are telling of the glory of God. Look up and seek His wisdom from above.
Now that we've covered general rules for interpretation and delved into understanding words, we need to talk about sentences. You might be thinking, well, I know how to read a sentence. Well, I have no doubt about that, and I'm not trying to make this harder than it really is, but there may be a number of aspects that we need to take into account. And keep in mind that if we don't establish the rules now, later on when we go to interpret a passage, we may kind of juggle the rules in our favor if we want a passage to say something in particular. So let's make sure we're doing a thorough job in getting all of the facts as we interpret. As you know, sentences are a combination of words intended to convey meanings that were in the mind of the author or speaker when those words were assembled. Now, if we want to understand a sentence correctly, then we must look for that author's meaning, not what we would like for the sentence to mean. That ought to be common sense, since we would expect people to understand our meanings when we speak and write, but it's easy for people to read or listen with an agenda. We've already seen how words and situations can impact the meanings of sentences. Now we're going to study a few rules for evaluating simple sentences. So rule number 1, the identity of a person or thing in a sentence, if not specified, must be determined by its antecedent. The antecedent is a previous word or phrase to which a pronoun refers. It may be in the same sentence or several sentences back in the context. The antecedent of a personal pronoun is not always the previous person named in a text. The previous subject under consideration should be examined, and its gender, number, and case must match. Consider the following sentences. I was with my wife and son at the fair, and she treated me to all the rides and bought my cotton candy. Well, who treated me to all the rides? My son is actually the last person mentioned before the pronoun, but it wasn't him. To know, we have to find who she is. That's accomplished by seeking the feminine antecedent. In this case, it refers to my wife, and now you know that my wife is a very generous woman. When we examine Acts 1 verse 9, we read that someone ascended into heaven. The pronoun he must be traced back to determine who. The Holy Spirit is the last masculine individual mentioned in verse 8, but the Holy Spirit is only mentioned in a quote being made by the subject. Verse 6 establishes who is actually under consideration. This emphasizes the need to examine a text thoroughly. In Acts 8, we read about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Verse 38 tells us that he baptized him. But who baptized whom? In this case, the possible antecedents are both named in order, but we may also know by determining the need. Who did and who did not need to be baptized? In Acts 2, 1 through 4, we find a group being baptized with the Holy Spirit. The pronoun they can be traced back to the previous verse at the end of chapter 1. That's verse 26. We are told that Matthias was numbered with the 11, and that makes 12, and tells us that we now have the 12 apostles gathered on Pentecost, and that it is the 12 apostles being baptized with the Holy Spirit. Now here's a text where this process becomes important, because some people want to go all the way back to the 15th verse of the previous chapter. In this way, they can get 120 baptized with the Holy Spirit and make the assertion that it was a gift to be poured out on all disciples. However, we can't pass up the antecedent established by Luke at the end of the chapter. There, the subject is the 12 apostles, not the disciples in general. Well, we're out of time. In our next video, we'll add a couple of additional rules that assure us of understanding sentences correctly.